Welcome everybody to TechCraft, this is Rob, and in today's video we're going to go step by step through the process of installing and configuring a Raspberry Pi. Let's go. So before we dive in, just a big shout out to my friends over at Vibeskins, who are a UK-based supplier of awesome skins for your smartphone. They sent me this camo green skin that goes very well with my midnight green iPhone. Applying the skin was super easy, it took me maybe about 5 minutes, and I am completely in love with the texture of this thing. I've been desperate to get rid of my case, but my phone is just so slippy, it's not really practical. But now with this skin on there, I can have a lightweight phone and I can have something that isn't gonna slip out of my hand. And the fact that it looks awesome is just a bonus. You can pick up your own skin at the vibeskins.com website, and if you use my code TechCraft15, you will get 15% off your first order. Without any further ado, let's get going. So the first step we're going to go through is to actually download the Raspbian operating system image, and then we are going to burn that to an SD card. So I've already downloaded it here, but let me just show you. If you come to the raspberrypi.org website, hit the downloads page, you can choose between Noobs, which is a kind of like installer for the operating system, or you can burn the operating system image directly, which I find to be a little bit easier. Go into the Raspbian page. And because we're going to do this with a graphical user interface, I recommend getting the Raspbian Buster with desktop, or possibly even the one with the desktop and the recommended software. But certainly do not get the light image, because that will give you no graphical desktop to work with. Once the image is downloaded, it's time to burn the SD card. I'm using the Balena Etcher app, which is on the Mac and on Windows, and I have an SD card plugged into my machine, and it's a 64 gig one. And I'm just going to select the image from my desktop and click flash. This will take a few minutes, and you'll probably have to enter your password, at least on the Mac, to make that work. It maybe takes about 5 or 6 minutes. Once the image completes burning, you can eject it from your machine, and you are basically done with your normal computer now. We can switch straight over to the Raspberry Pi. So to get going, you'll need to connect the Pi to your monitor with an HDMI cable. If you're using the Pi 3, this is just a normal HDMI cable. If you're using a Pi 4, you'll need a micro HDMI cable. Make sure you put your newly burned SD card into the SD card slot on the Pi. And you will need to use a wired keyboard and mouse to begin with, because there's no Bluetooth while doing the installation. With the Pi all ready, let's plug it in and get going. So here we can see the Pi in first boot, and it will actually do some manipulation to the file system and then reboot again. So after a short while, you'll be presented with the desktop like this, and there is a welcome to Raspberry Pi window in the middle there that will take you through the setup procedure. Before I do that though, I want to actually just tweak the display settings a little bit to make the text more legible. So I'm going to press the Raspberry icon in the top left corner, and then in preferences, I want to choose appearance settings. Once that window appears, I'm going to go to the defaults tab, and I'm going to select set defaults for large screens. This just makes everything a little bit bigger, and actually I'm going to make things ever so slightly bigger just for the purposes of this video. So I'm going to choose a 20-point font, press OK. Right, so you should be able to see things a lot easier now. So I'm going to work through the getting started guide here. I'll press next. And the first thing you need to do is set your country, your language, and your time zone. If you don't set the country right, you might have issues with your Wi-Fi, because this is also controlling the Wi-Fi country configuration. This is all right for me, so I'll click next. You can change the password if you want. The default user is Pi, and the default password is Raspberry. I'm just going to change this to something very quickly. Press next. I can see that I actually have a small black border around my desktop here. The screen is not stretched all the way to the edge of my monitor. If you see that as well, then you can click this button here on the setup screen box, and that will get corrected very shortly. Press next. Now we're going to scan for some Wi-Fi networks. This is a fairly critical part of the setup, because you can't update the operating system until you connect to a network. So I'm just going to choose one of my networks and get connected. So now we have to run an update for the system software, and I'm actually going to skip this because this stage will often fail until you've done a reboot because your time zone has not been updated, and we'll do this manually in a second. So I'm going to click skip. We're now ready. I do recommend doing a restart now. This will make sure that your time zone is all corrected and that the date is correct, and then we can run an update. So let's click restart. So now that the system has restarted, you will see that you are connected to Wi-Fi. And if you had the black border issue from before, you'll see that that has now been fixed. And what we want to do now is update the system. And to do that, I'm going to use the terminal app up here, and we're going to enter the update commands via the keyboard. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so that everybody can see what I'm typing in. And we're going to start by typing in a command that is sudo apt update. Now let me explain this very quickly. The sudo is a command that says run everything else after this as if I'm the super user. Apt is the package manager that the Raspberry Pi uses to manage its software packages. And update says please update everything you know about the whole universe of packages. That takes a little while, but once it's done, we can now run an upgrade, and we're going to do a very similar command, sudo as the super user, apt, and this time upgrade. And this will now upgrade all the packages that I have that are out of date. I'll be prompted if I want to continue. I'm going to press yes, and we're going to continue and do that. The first time you do the update, it can take quite some time, and there's quite a lot of changes. I do recommend doing a reboot after the first update. And at this point, you basically have a working Raspberry Pi machine. There are a few more things I want to do though. So I'm going to reboot and we're going to come back. And the first thing we'll do is set up Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. So the first thing I want to do is set up my Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. And to do this, I'm going to put my mouse into pairing mode before I do anything. And then now I'm going to go to the Bluetooth menu in the top right corner and choose Add Device. And I will scroll through here until I see my mouse, which is there, and I will click Pair. Now this can take quite some time and it can be quite finicky. What I've found is that often the mouse will pair quickly if you have it in pairing mode before you start, but if you put the mouse into pairing mode after you start this process, it will be a little bit less reliable. So make sure you put the device into pairing mode first. I'll now repeat the same thing with my keyboard. For the keyboard, I have to enter a code, so I'll do that right now. Be sure that you press enter at the end of the code. It's not enough to just add in the 6 numbers, and then the keyboard is now paired. I'm going to quickly switch to my Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, unplug this wired one, and we'll continue next with setting up screen sharing. So thankfully my desk is a lot tidier now that I have my Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, and we'll go ahead and set up the screen sharing. So to do this, click on the Raspberry icon in the top left, go into Preferences, go to Raspberry Pi configuration. In here, you want to go into the Interfaces tab and make sure that VNC is enabled. And if you are ever going to use remote access over the terminal, you may also want to enable SSH at the same time. Click OK, and pretty much now you can access the Pi through the remote desktop. There are some tweaks we can make to make this work from more computers. Let's do those. So to add the extra configuration to VNC, we'll click on the VNC icon in the top right here, and that brings up the VNC server configuration. Now the text is quite small, so I'll zoom in this in post so you can see better. So I'll click on the little hamburger icon here, come into Options, and then I want to go into the Security tab. Make sure that encryption is set to Prefer On, and that authentication is set to VNC password, not to Unix password. Click Apply. You now need to enter a password. That password has to be a minimum of 8 characters. Click OK. Okay. So next, what we want to do is come into the Users and Permissions tab here and make sure that the standard user has all the right permissions, and I can see that these are the permissions I want already, so I don't need to make any changes there. So I'm going to click OK and come out of this. What I want to do now is just make a note of this IP address here, 192.168.1.223. This is the IP of my Raspberry Pi connected to the Wi-Fi, and that is the IP address I'll be using to connect via screen sharing. Let's see how that works. So here I am in Screens, and I'm going to click plus up here to add in a new screen. and I'm going to choose custom, and I'll give it a name, which is new Pi. And remember the address from before, that was 192.168. That was 192.168.1.223. And I'll just tweak the operating system here to Raspberry Pi because that gives it a nice icon. And we want the authentication method to be VNC password, which is what we set earlier. And I will now click done. So there's my new machine, and I can click on that. And it takes a few seconds to load up, but there you go. There is the desktop. And if you get prompted for the password, it's just the password you used before, but I'd already connected to this machine earlier, so I didn't get prompted. And I can now swipe around and click where I need to be. And if you have the monitor on at the same time, you can actually see the changes you're making. This is obviously very, very powerful. So now that's screen sharing set up, and I just want to do two more things before I'll consider this setup to be complete. The first of those is to set up external drive support. So I'm just going to plug in my SanDisk Extreme SSD that I picked up on Black Friday. What you'll almost certainly see as soon as you plug the drive in is that you'll get this error mounting blah 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 at media/pi unknown file system type exFAT. So my drive is formatted with a file system type called exFAT, and I do this because it can be supported on Windows, Mac, and on Linux, but you have to actually add support to it in Linux for it to work properly. Let's do that now. So I'm going to click OK to come out of there. I'm going to bring up a terminal window. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger again so you can all see it. And we're going to use the same application we used before to update the system, which is apt. And this time, rather than update the packages that we already have, we're going to install some new ones. And if you want to find out what those packages are, you can do a search. So I'm going to do sudo apt search exFAT. And let's see what packages we know about for the exFAT system. Let me extend this window. And I can see there are two packages here, exFAT Fuse, which is the driver, and then exFAT Utils, which are some utilities. And I'm going to install both of those. So sudo apt, this time install to add a new package, exFAT Fuse. And you can actually list multiple packages on the same line for install. So we'll install exFAT Utils as well. I'm just going to quickly reboot, and that should pick up my drive just fine. So we're back from the reboot, and you can see that I have my Extreme SSD disk mounted on the desktop here. So I can click on that, and there we go. We can see this in the file manager. So the last thing I want to do now is set up sharing for this drive so that I can access it from other machines. Let's see how that works. So I'm going to close this down and open up another terminal window. And we're going to use a protocol called SMB, which is, I believe, server message block. And this is fairly standard on Windows, but Mac supports it as well. And we can add support to it for Linux, which means that this drive can be accessed from basically any computer that you have. And again, we're going to use apt to install some more packages. So I'm going to increase the size of this window. I can find my right key. So I'm going to increase the size of the window like that, and we'll do another search. Now, I know that on Linux, the package that runs SMB is called Samba, so we can do a sudo apt search Samba. And a few packages arrive at this time because there's quite a lot of Samba support, but what I really want to get is the core ones, which is Samba and Samba Common Bin. So Samba is the actual file sharing support itself, and Common Bin is a whole bunch of useful tools that we'll need. So let's install both of those. It's going to come right back to the bottom of this screen. In fact, I'm going to type clear to get a nice clear screen. Sudo apt install Samba Common Bin. Oh, that's an extra M in there. Let's get rid of that. Click enter. This time, the package size is quite large, so we're prompted if we want to continue or not, so I'm going to press yes. Sometimes when you're installing packages, you'll get these little pop-up windows. You really don't necessarily need to know too much about them. Obviously, you can navigate them with the keyboard. I'm pressing left and right here. I'm just going to hit no for this. So that's Samba set up, and by default now we can already access our home folder. Let's switch over to the Mac and see how that works. So here I am at my Mac, and what I want to do is go into Finder and click on the Go menu, and then from the Go menu choose Connect to Server. You can also press Command and K. I should note that I've actually rebooted my Raspberry Pi just to make sure that all of the Samba settings take effect. If you know what you're doing, you can just restart the Samba server itself, but for beginners this is a little bit easier. So here I am, and I've already tested this, but basically in the Connect to Server address bar here, you want to put in the IP address of your Pi, which is the same IP address we used for screen sharing before, and you're going to prefix that with SMB://. This is to say that we're using the SMB protocol to connect, and then press the connect button. After a short period of time, up pops the login, and you can choose Pi as the password, as the name, and whatever password you typed in before, and then press connect. Eventually you'll get to select from the volumes that you want to mount, and we have the Pi volume, which is essentially our home drive, and I can click OK here. And then up pops all the things that I can see on my home folder on the Pi. Let's go back to the Pi itself now and actually configure sharing of that external drive. So we're back at the Pi now, and we have to configure this so that our Extreme SSD is shared over the network. Okay, so to share this SSD that I've plugged in to my Pi over the network, we need to edit the configuration file for Samba, restart Samba, and then we are good to go. So let's start by finding a way to edit the config file. And the easiest way to do this straight out of the box with your Pi is to open up a terminal window and in there type in sudo mousepad. Mousepad is a text editor that comes already installed, and then the path to the file is /etc/samba/smb.conf, like that. That will bring up a text editor like this that we can then add our little snippet to. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom here, you basically ignore everything else. Scroll all the way to the bottom, I've already added the snippet, which is this here. So you need a section that's in kind of square brackets, and the name in the middle is the volume name that you will see on the remote computer. The path is the path to the actual drive itself, and I'll show you how to find that very shortly. I don't want guests to be able to write to this, only people with the password for the Pi user, but I do want the folder to be writable, and this create mask just makes sure that everybody can read and write the files that I have created. If you're an advanced user, you'll know how to tweak this and make that a little bit more specific. So that's all you need to add. Obviously the path will change for your drive. Let's see how to find out what the path is. So the easiest way to actually find the path is to come to the icon on your desktop, right click on it, and then just choose copy path. And then if I delete this out of my text file here and paste in what was just copied, you'll see that it's given me the path. You can mess around on the command line to find this, but I think that is the easiest way. I'm going to make sure this is saved with Control S, or obviously File Save as well if you don't want to use the command line shortcuts. Come back to the terminal now after closing this, and we have to restart Samba. Now we can reboot the Pi if you don't want to mess around, but let me just show you this for completeness. I'm going to type in sudo again because this is a command that we do as the super user. Then I'm using a command called systemctl, system control, and I want to restart something, and I want that to be SMBD, which is the kind of SMB server from Samba. I'll press enter, and that will do that. And now we can go to our remote computer and access that remote drive. And I'm going to do that from my iPad. Let's head over there now. So here I am back with my iPad, and I'm going to open up the Files app down here. And what I want to do is click on the three dots up here in the top left and click Connect to Server. And I'm going to use a very similar string as we used before. So it's SMB://192.168.1.223. Remember that your IP address may be different, and then I'll press connect. And we have a registered user, and that user is our Pi user. And I know what my password is. It's password. Oh yeah. Click next, and you can see both of the volumes are here now. And if I go onto SSD, there you can see is my SSD that I have plugged into my Pi. So that's what I consider to be the basics of a Raspberry Pi setup, especially for one you're going to use with a monitor and a keyboard. Obviously, there are many more things you can do, and if you have a Pi 4 and you have an iPad, then you can configure those two to work together as I shown in my previous video. I hope that you found this video useful, and I hope that you found it entertaining. If you did, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and don't just hit subscribe, but hit the bell as well so you don't miss out on any future content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.